So I'm here to talk about my very first research project. I'm a dance lecturer in the School of Music and Performing Arts, but this is actually my first practice-based research project, having previous life being a performer and a dancer. So, to start off, I'm just going to read some of the details first. So, as an audience member, do we feel movement in performance? Kinaesthetic empathy involves the internal stimulation of movement of the brain of the observer, which contributes to action, understanding, and empathy. For example, emotional expressions may be embodied through the observer's neural and physiological responses. But it's unknown whether kinaesthetic empathy is dependent on sight, or it can be experienced in a more direct and somatic manner. And this is really interesting to me. So this project was a collaboration between researchers in performance, cognitive neuroscientists, to test the impact of immersive performance on the emotion and arousal and spontaneous motor responses in audiences with and without sensory impairment. And the work was performed at 3 venues. Firstly, at the Broth Theatre in Chatham, where my company's based. Then at Sense UK, they've just opened a brand new building in Birmingham, which is all sensory, as you would expect. It's quite amazing. And then finally performed here as part of the Canterbury Festival. So I thought that to give you an idea of my context and why I'm doing this, and my history, I thought I'd just give you a little idea of where I've come from. So, this is me. For 25 years I've been running a company called Loop Dance Company, based at Broth Theatre in Chatham. And I've performed and shared work with many different types of people. You can see some of the different things that we've done there, and in various different settings, which I'll go on to in a second. I love collaborating. Collaboration is my thing. I like to collaborate with many different types of artists, different types of people, and really ranging different performance settings. Really what makes my heart sing is looking at performance in installations, or site-specific, or in the main theatre. But I've always worked within the context of my dance company, and the company is a charity. So then, starting to work in a university setting, it was very new for me. And people were saying, Nina, you need to develop your practice-based research. And I said, I have no idea what that is. Will somebody please explain? So yes, this is my first, keep standing in front of it, my first go at that. But it's also really important for me to point out that I like to work with different types of people. And I think that that's something that's quite normal for a dance artist. And sometimes we feel that we have to, we're reminded we have to tell people about it. Because actually, I'm very used to working with professional dancers. I'm very used to working with young graduates, always calling my company saying, I want a job, and I'll say, I'm sorry I haven't got any money, but I can help you find one and I can point you in the right direction, because then we can always use them as well to help us. I've had to earn money over the last 25 years doing lots of different types of teaching. I've taught in primary settings, secondary, colleges, universities, and lots of different types of community settings. And over the years we've worked with different types of people, whether they be people that are perhaps deemed hard to reach, or people that might be falling through the system in some way. We've done quite a lot of work in mental health, and that's become a real interest of mine as well. So, this is one of my favourite pieces of work, Atkinson's Blind Light. And I saw this a few years ago, and I think it's been the basis of many of my pieces in the recent years. And what I like most about this is that I'm not really sure who the audience is, who is part of the art, who's not part of the art. I love it that the lady on the outside is looking at somebody on the inside, and the person on the inside is looking at the person on the outside. I remember going to see this with my sister, who's in fashion. She's a menswear designer, and I expected her to react in the same way to experiential art that I did, and she didn't want to go in, and I was really surprised. And I went skipping in very happily, and then when I came out, she said it was quite strange seeing me disappear. So I felt like I was being almost the entertainer at that point as well. So I do really love Bronwyn's work. And of course, relating back to the theme of this series, my interest is looking at the audience looking at the work, and that's what the whole of this project is about. So, to explain to you exactly what we did, first of all, I got my dancers together and we had a play around in the studio, and for us that's usually, it's a joyful thing for us to do, just spend time together. We don't necessarily have to come up with anything. We had lots of playtime. And when I was starting to think about, well, if I'm going to look at the audience and look at whether there is a sense of kinesthetic empathy and whether people do feel dance or not, I think that's my phone as well, how embarrassing is that? I wanted to bring in somebody who might be an expert in that field. And at the time we'd been doing some work with Kent Association for the Blind, and they said, well, you know, we can all come in and give you some feedback. So they came into our rehearsal process. They spent 2 days with us. And some of the things that they found were that they wanted to be more inside the work. Being close to the work wasn't enough. They want to actually step inside and be amongst the dancers. They didn't like the sound being from one direction. They wanted the sound to come from everywhere. They wanted to be really immersed in the whole experience. Something that one of the ambassadors said was, I really loved it when the dancers span. And I thought that was really interesting because he was completely blind. He didn't see anything. And I thought, well, how on earth can he tell me that the dancers were spinning? So with some more research and some longer conversations with this gentleman, he said, well, he hadn't always been blind. He went blind at the age of 7. And so there was some memory of seeing movement. And then 25 years later, he was able to feel that. I thought, well, how on earth can he feel that without seeing it? So this sends me on more of a journey. I'm talking to some amazing people that set up a brand new festival in London, and they were also working with Sense UK. They set up a festival called Open Senses. And Open Senses was a series of symposiums around the senses, but also performances. And they had performances from lots of different types of art forms, and they asked us if we'd like to perform the work so far, which we did, and we performed in King's Cross Station, which was an interesting space to put it in, because obviously people are there for a different purpose. And having done quite a lot of site-specific work, it wasn't anything too surprising to be in a place where people didn't expect to find dance. There was a beautiful moment when somebody walked through with their trolley bag, stopped, and realised they were in the middle of the dance, and then scurried off. And at the same time, we had lots of volunteers with us who said, we'll go out and talk to all of the people around, and obviously they weren't there to see a performance. The performance happened. So the feedback that we got from these people was really interesting. I'd like to read you some of their feedback. I wanted to join in, my toes were twitching. And I think that I've often heard people say that they've seen performances and they've felt that they were already moving. And I know that this is something linked to kinesthetic empathy. Somebody said it made me feel calmer in this crazy place, people rushing by, and actually they felt a sense of calm by watching the dance. So well, that's great as well. And it was lovely to watch whilst I waited for my train to pass the time. I think perhaps it's good to show the film now, before we move on to any more. Shall we press go? It's very short, and it was actually of our process in the studio.
Maybe if people are at the back, they might want to come nearer if they... Sure. Or not, if that's what they want.
So the lovely film shot by Kim von Kussen. I'm going to just talk a little bit more about the project and explain what the hell was going on there. So we've been basically looking at that video. We've been looking at the process of the dance coming together, and I just want to kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about some of my collaborators. So in order to create that environment, I worked with the lovely Dr. Andy Hurst, who I work with in the School of Music and Performing Arts. We talked a lot about how we would create a small environment, sometimes in some very, very large spaces. So the Brook Theatre is beautiful, it's got huge high ceilings, and we wanted to pull the rostra back so that there was room for us to have everything on the floor. But we also wanted to contain that. So what Andy did, he was able to light a haze with 3 layers, so it actually looked like we were standing within a box, and was able to light the dancers as they got higher and higher. I worked with sound and composer Saviano. I've worked with him before at Roehampton University. He's also not just incredibly talented, but interested in looking at how his sound can help health, and he's working with some medical doctors, so there was some correlation between our work, and he's looking at white blood cells and whether listening to music can have an effect on the body as well. I was very fortunate to have Kim von Kussen, who's a friend of one of my colleagues, offer to come and film everything and photograph for free because it was part of her PhD. And you know, in the arts, we're never really that rich. So when she said she would do something for free, I said yes, please, thanks very much. And then we gave her lots of biscuits. And then we got in touch with Big Mab, who are a team of cognitive neuroscientists based at the University of Manchester. And with that partnership, we were able to talk about how we might be able to go about testing our audience and see how we do that. We also did some sharings along the way, so we brought in some people during our creative process to give us some feedback. Unfortunately, we couldn't get our partially sighted and blind ambassadors back, but we had some people that we always work with that were happy to come in and work with us. And again, that informs the process, constantly evolving. Obviously, finding touches, we started to put costumes together, and work with the rehearsal director. So it came to the testing, and Judith Beck, the cognitive neuroscientist, and I were talking about how best to test people. We decided we really needed, we only had enough money to test 4 or 5 people at a time. We went for 4 at each performance. We had 5 performances. We had ankle, knee and wrist sensors to sense movement of the audience and whether they had any involuntary movement. We also tested their heart rate, and one person wore the head cam, as you can see up there, to see where their focus was going. And as you can see, some of the preliminary research suggests that there are changes in the heart. We've got 3 different colours there. They represent 3 different people. And although the levels of heart rate obviously are going to be different compared to somebody's health and fitness, and whether they are very active, they'll probably have a lower pulse rate than somebody who's unactive. But I think that there are some correlations between the movement between all 3, and that came across as well. So we looked at the physiological data, and performance was divided into segments. So we looked at 4 sections, as you can see there: the waiting section at the beginning of the piece, elevation when we started to lift the dancers, levitation when the dancers seemed to float through the space, and then a final frenetic build-up of the movement. The video footage that was sent up to Jude, she could try and correlate that with points in the music, and whether there were changes in people's heart rate as well. So recordings, when coding, use these points to identify evidence of responses in the data. So preliminary analysis suggests that the changes in heart rate correspond to changes in music and the movement, which we expected, and subjective ratings indicate that the audiences embodied the performance and experienced feelings of happiness and surprise, which I kind of also expected. But one of the things that I expected there to be a bigger difference was the difference between a professional dancer in the audience and there being somebody who's an absolute beginner or never danced, apart from after 2 drinks at a wedding or something. And actually, there's no difference really at all. Not huge amounts of difference by experience, which I thought was quite interesting. But what I find extremely interesting is the data for people that were on the outside of the work or people that were immersed in the middle of the work is different. And for here, what I find the most surprising is the people that were on the periphery of the performance. We had chairs within the performance, the dancers danced around them, and they seemed to be much calmer, had experienced happiness and enjoyment, whereas the people that were on the outside were the ones that actually started to feel sad and angry. Which surprised me. And I wonder whether that's either because they had a fuller idea of what was going on because they were on the outside of the work, or whether that's because they were feeling a sense of empathy for the person in the middle who was close to a dancer that might be kicked at any point. I'm not sure. So I think that maybe that needs a little bit more research, but I find that quite fascinating. So what next? Further analysis will support and explore the spontaneous motion. The motion sensors have taken our cognitive neuroscientists a lot longer to look at than we expected. I think that they thought it would be very easy to analyse the movement because when you're watching something you would sit still. But actually, when you're watching a lot of movement, the last thing you do is sit still. Even when you've been told by the choreographer not to move your legs in case you trip over a dancer, people still move even if they're very small amounts. So the very fact that the audience have moved a lot and there's a lot of data is quite exciting to me. I also am really interested to see where that will go. The results will hopefully inform our understanding of action simulation, but also will help me to create more exciting pieces and more engaging choreography. And I'm really keen to explore more of an experiential journey and maybe how close a dancer can be to an audience member. So it's the beginning of a story for me. This is certainly not the end of my research, and it's the very beginning. So.
Thank you very much.
Did anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. What I'm interested in is, obviously there's going to be, well, I'm saying obviously, it's obviously actually there's a massive assumption that I'm right. There's a correlation between the dance and music, because music is all dance and
Yes.
So, I'm interested in people's experience if they were only to watch the performance with no music. I kind of intuitively feel like they still would want to move, because that's sort of what I feel like I would think, but I'm just interested in that in your rehearsals without music, that people were like feeling that strong.
Absolutely, and Savio, our composer, was really keen for us to actually have the sound on headphones so that there would be either no outside sound at all, or some people could have silence, or some people could have different soundtracks. And I think that's the next step that we need to start talking about. But yeah, it could be very interesting. The way that Savio and I worked together was that he came along to the first week of rehearsals he set up in the corner and played as we improvised and created work and built the choreography. And then he sent me what he'd created, and then I would send him videos back of what we'd used his work for, and so it really did bounce between the two of us. But yes, I know that he'd be very keen for us to explore that level. Absolutely. I think that because the sound builds with the movement, and that's the way it was created, they both go hand in hand. So it's difficult to pull them apart at the moment.
And something that I really noticed is how frequently do people present that performance in silence?
In recent years, not as often. It was a very big fashion, particularly the postmodern dance movement. There was a lot of silence. It's not unusual. It's not unheard of, but it's definitely not the norm these days.
What you said about people in peripheral dolls feeling upset or angry.
Yeah.
I wonder, my immediate reactions were they just wishing that they were in the middle, because I would have been thinking,
Maybe.
why does my mum seem to get in the middle? I want to be amongst it. I wonder if it might be worth finding out if there's an aspect of him being involved in that.
Yeah, and actually, it's very much like any kind of, when you get audience participation, nobody wanted to go in the middle. They were like, no, I'm quite happy on the side, thank you. And so perhaps that they'd wished that they had taken that chance. It was a shame that there wasn't more heart rate sensors at the Canterbury performance, because we had so many more people taking part and so many more people wanting to. Perhaps some of them were my students and were keen to get involved. But we didn't have enough heart rate sensors. They're so expensive. One of the ideas I have is to use a Fitbit, and maybe everybody can bring their own. I got one for Christmas and I'm completely obsessed with it. That actually my Fitbit thinks I'm asleep when I'm doing yoga classes, which my yoga teacher loves. And that's another conversation. So during the breathing at the beginning of our yoga class and the meditation at the end, my Fitbit thinks I'm asleep. But when I'm asleep, it thinks I'm awake. So there's obviously there's more stillness, there's more rest when I'm meditating than when I'm actually sleeping.
I also wondered if there was something about the expectations as well. The people that are willing to go in the middle would be more receptive, perhaps, and more positively receptive than the people that put their kind of
Yeah,
So one just feels slightly hostile to the whole experience, don't you?
I think you're right, actually. I think that takes me back to the blind light moment when I expected my sister to want to come in with me, and actually she was much happier on the outside. And I'm the kind of person that would always put myself in the centre and enjoy that experience. But perhaps that's because I've been conditioned to do that, being in the art form that I'm in. And certainly at the Canterbury performance, there were more dancers, more people were willing to go in the middle. A lot of people don't want to put themselves out and expose themselves in that way. And interestingly, Matt came along, Matt Wright, to the Chatham performance, and he purposefully tried not to look at the dance. Unfortunately, he was the person wearing the headcam. So. But that's quite interesting that he wanted to experience it in a different way. And that should be open to interpretation as well.
It would be interesting to know where people are starting from, because you've got the data looking at emotional responses.
Yes.
But everybody walking into that start of that would have been in a different emotional space.
Absolutely.
As they started, so it'd be really interesting to look at what happened, where the correlations were, where the changes and shifts were.
Absolutely.
From the start through the performance. That's how you do it.
Well, that's a really interesting point. We've, over the last few years, run a few projects for Mind in Folkestone. We did a mental health project with 3 schools. And one of the points was that we questioned the young people before the workshop and then afterwards, and they filled out what we called a star graph. And they star where they felt on this graph for various feelings. And maybe that's something that we could incorporate. Because there was a lot of research findings from that to say that the movement did calm them down, and they felt much happier when they had finished the sessions than when they came in. To a certain extent, obviously, they get to a point where they forget whatever it was that was upsetting them when they came in the room, but yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the things that Andy and I worked really closely on, to try and create an environment where people stepped into the space and it felt different because of the haze, and that you stepped in and sat down within the dance, that you actually forgot anything else that was going on in your life, hopefully.
So there was some sort of atmospheric haze that you used, some sort of smoke?
Yeah, so theatrical haze, and the dance was in 4 points. We had 4 booms with a light on it at each level, so we would call them shins, mids and heads. And he created this beautiful head where he narrowed the light and it looked like a wall, so that it felt like you were boxed in some way. And at the end, when the dancer jumps up, they break through the light. So
what did the scientists think about what you'd asked them to do?
Jude and Ellen have worked with dance before. They're some of the industry leading in dance for Parkinson, so they're quite used to looking at movement and how it affects the body and the brain. So when I was put in touch with them, they were quite open to another experiment. But actually, my lack of understanding about their art form meant that I didn't ask the right questions, and now obviously I've learned those lessons. And I think that they had made some assumptions about what I did as well. So it was good that she came down and spent a few days with us and watched some rehearsals. And every time we did a performance, the process was slightly refined. We're talking about doing another few performances and refining the testing to see if we can get some different findings and different data. We did a performance, as I said, at Birmingham at Sense UK, and obviously many times when you're working with people with visual impairments, there are other disabilities that go hand in hand with that. And what we hadn't anticipated was that some people would find the movement coming around them extremely disturbing. So we weren't able to get as much data as we'd hoped at that performance, but it was incredibly interesting because there was one particular young lady who was very disturbed by the dance going around her, even though she couldn't see it. So
that's just air pressure, I suppose?
I think it must be the movement. It could have been the sound as well.
Yeah. So that really is kinesthetic, isn't it? You're sensing movement without seeing it.
Yeah.
But then there is also a lot of women interested in music, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. The sense of building
Yeah.
or calmness. Yeah, absolutely.
What I find fascinating is the fact that you're getting scientific data from what is really an emotional art activity. And there's lots of sort of hazards too, but it does look like you've actually got some objective observations on how people might be sensing in that situation. So it's actually really good.
Yeah, I think it's going to need a lot of narrowing down, and suddenly when I got myself into the middle of this project, I was like, oh my god, this is huge. But I think that's probably the case with many scientific experiments in that way. I know that when I dance, I feel happy, and that's something that I've felt for many, many years. And when we've done the project for mental health, we know that when we've worked with young adolescents, that they have felt happier as well. My argument, I think, is leading towards, well, can you watch dance and feel happy? Because some people don't necessarily want to do it. And if the case is that you can watch it, then could you prescribe people to watch it? And we're working with Involve Medway, who are they're an organisation that work, they're commissioned by the NHS, and they're looking at prescribing arts activities. Really exciting work, so we're working with them on that idea. So really that's where I think I'd like to go.
Well, it ticks the box with the interdisciplinary, that's a big thing with the REF. Because you work in 2 institutions, who are you going to be presenting your research through?
Through Canterbury.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Canterbury got in first.
But the interdisciplinary arguably operates when somebody's working outside of their area of knowledge, and then there's something that's learned by both parties. I think in part why I was asking you about what the scientists were doing, even though
Thank you. Thank you for being so kind on my first time.